If you spend any amount of time looking at how human beings administer justice, you inevitably walk away with this profound sense of frustration.
Oh, absolutely. It's universally frustrating.
Right. I mean, we have entire genres of entertainment today, like true crime, investigative documentaries, sprawling legal dramas, and they're all built entirely around the premise that human courtrooms are incredibly fragile spaces.
Yeah, fragile's a good word for it.
You look at a court transcript or you sit in a gallery and you realize just how heavily we rely on fragments.
Right. Just pieces of the whole picture.
Exactly. A judge has to make a ruling based on circumstantial evidence or, testimonies filtered through the flawed memories of traumatized people.
Or you have juries that bring their own unspoken biases into the deliberation room.
Yes, exactly. And there are always crucial conversations that happen behind closed doors, unrecorded, that will literally never see the light of day. We are constantly making these incredibly consequential decisions while essentially flying blind.
It is a profoundly limited system. We are essentially trying to reconstruct a shattered pane of glass using, only half the pieces, and we call the result justice.
That's such a good way to put it.
And the psychological weight of that limitation is staggering. Throughout human history, we have to live with the conscious knowledge that the guilty frequently walk free because they have better lawyers or they have more systemic power.
Or they just know how to manipulate the system.
Right. And conversely, the innocent are often completely crushed under the machinery of the law. The scales of justice, even the most robust democratic societies we have, they always seem to have a thumb resting heavily on one side.
Yeah. And that leaves us with this lingering, almost existential discomfort. We crave justice, but we know we live in a world where moral, muddy waters are just, the baseline reality.
They are the air we breathe.
But then you step into the biblical texts we are looking at today. Today, for this deep dive, we are exploring a stack of incredibly detailed theological manuscripts, commentaries, and scriptural infographics. And they attempt to map out the entire biblical narrative. Right, from the absolute beginning. We are talking about a timeline stretching from the absolute beginning of creation all the way to what these texts call the new creation.
And the absolute, undeniable focal point of all these sources is a moment where those muddy waters we just talked about completely evaporate.
Which is wild to think about. It is the most majestic, terrifying, and awe-inspiring scene in all of biblical literature. It is known as the Great White Throne Judgment.
Described in Revelation chapter 20, verses 11 through 15.
Right. And the sources paint the scene where history itself has run its complete course.
It is the ultimate vanishing point of human history. Every empire that ever seemed invincible has crumbled into dust. Every single human life has been lived. Death itself, as a concept and a reality, is quite literally put on trial. Yeah. And the core argument of these sources is that every unanswered question humanity has ever screamed into the void about fairness, about hidden abuse, about unpunished cruelty, it is all about to be answered in blinding absolute perfection.
Now, if you are listening to this right now, I know that just hearing the phrase ultimate judgment might make your chest tighten. I mean, the concept of a final, inescapable courtroom is heavy.
It carries an enormous emotional weight.
It does. It is completely natural to feel a sense of dread or to wonder about the fundamental character of God in this scenario. Like, how can a deity described as perfectly loving also act as an uncompromising judge?
Right. How do those two concepts not simply obliterate each other?
Exactly. I want to acknowledge that tension right up front for you listening. But stick with us, because the mission of this deep dive is to unpack how this ultimate courtroom isn't merely some terrifying warning of divine wrath meant to, scare people into submission.
Far from it. These manuscripts argue that this moment is the grand culmination of a massive, intricate, redemptive plan.
Right. It is the exact coordinate where perfect justice and perfect mercy finally intersect.
And that intersection creates the central paradox that we will be navigating throughout this entire discussion. The judge who sits on this throne of final, terrifying condemnation is the exact same Savior who willingly stretched out his hands to be nailed to a Roman cross.
Which is it's a profound thought.
It is the same person. You cannot understand the throne without understanding the cross, and you cannot understand the cross without looking forward to the throne.
Okay, so to really grasp how the judge and the savior are the same person, the sources insist we have to pull back.
Way back.
Way, way back. We cannot start in Revelation, and we actually can't even start in the Garden of Eden. We have to journey back into what theologians call eternity past.
Right, before time, before matter. before the first atom was spoken into existence.
So what exactly is happening there before everything?
Well, the manuscripts spend a significant amount of time dismantling a very popular, almost instinctual misconception we have about the biblical story. We tend to view the narrative as God constantly reacting to human failures.
Right, like humanity messed up in Eden, so God had to scramble.
Exactly.
Okay.
Like he had to convene a heavenly boardroom meeting and draft an emergency backup plan called redemption.
Right, plan B.
But the Gospel of John explicitly refutes that. It opens with, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God." Long before there was a physical universe requiring redemption, the triune God existed in a state of perfect, self-sufficient fellowship.
There was no lack, no loneliness, no crisis.
Not at all.
So he is the ultimate I am, an existence that requires nothing outside of itself to be complete.
Because of that perfect self-sufficiency, the cross was never an emergency response to a universe spinning out of control. Both the concept of redemption and the necessity of final judgment were eternally planned.
They're woven into the very blueprint of existence.
Right, so when we finally arrive at the book of Genesis, the act of creation itself establishes a profound legal reality. In the ancient Near East, there was a fundamental understanding regarding ownership. If you create something, you own it.
Makes sense.
The biblical text establishes God as the exclusive creator, which inherently establishes his absolute ownership over the cosmos.
And ownership naturally gives birth to authority. I mean, if I build a house from the ground up with my own materials and my own labor, I have the authority to determine what happens inside that house.
Exactly. You set the rules for the inhabitants.
Right.
That authority creates human accountability. You cannot separate the biblical concept of creation from the concept of accountability. We are not autonomous particles floating in a meaningless void. We are created beings occupying a space that belongs to someone else.
And the nature of that someone else is critical here. The sources highlight Psalm 89, verse 14, which provides this stunning architectural metaphor for God's character.
But that's a crucial verse.
It really is. It says, "Righteousness and justice are the foundation of your throne. Steadfast love and faithfulness go before you."
It's incredible imagery.
I love that image. Because justice isn't some weapon wielded by the throne. It is the structural foundation the throne actually sits upon. It's the concrete slab holding the whole thing up.
The philosophical implications of that verse are profound. It argues that justice rests beneath love. In our modern culture, we often pit these two concepts against each other in a zero-sum game.
Right, like you can either be loving or you can be just, but you can't be both.
Exactly. We think you have to compromise one to achieve the other. But the biblical texts argue that love without justice isn't love at all. It devolves into mere sentimentality.
Just a weak, permissive shrug in the face of true evil.
Yes. And on the flip side, justice devoid of love becomes cruel, rigid, and ultimately tyrannical. In the nature of God, these two realities are perfectly integrated.
Okay, so let's take that integration and look at how it plays out in the Garden of Eden.
Let's do it.
Because the sources do a deep dive into the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Now, if you grew up in Sunday school or just, absorbed Western cultural imagery, you probably picture a shiny red apple and a simple test of willpower.
Right, like God put a cookie jar on the counter and said, "Don't touch."
Exactly. But the texts show that the fruit itself is completely irrelevant to the actual crisis. The tree represented moral jurisdiction.
It represented the boundary line between the creator and the created.
Right. So the central question of the tree was never about a dietary restriction. The question was whether humanity would gratefully receive its definition of morality from the creator, or whether humanity would attempt to seize the authority to determine good and evil independently.
The act of eating the fruit was a declaration of absolute autonomy. It was the creature looking at the creator and saying, "I no longer recognize your right to rule over me."
I was reading this and thinking, it's the ultimate lease violation.
Oh, I like that.
Right. Imagine a tenant who is gifted residence in an absolutely pristine, all-expenses-paid estate. The owner is benevolent, the fridge is always stocked, the grounds are perfect.
It's a sweet deal.
It is. But eventually, the tenant isn't satisfied with simply enjoying the gift. They go down to the county clerk's office, forge some documents, and attempt to cross out the landlord's name on the property deed, writing in their own name instead.
Wow, yeah.
They aren't just breaking a house rule about keeping their shoes off the carpet. They are attempting to usurp the title deed to the universe.
And the fallout from that usurpation was instantaneous and multidimensional. The vertical relationship with God shattered. But so did the horizontal relationships.
Right, Adam and Eve immediately turn on each other.
Yes, and their relationship with the physical environment becomes antagonistic.
Hmm.
But what the sources find truly fascinating is the psychological reaction to this fracture. Genesis chapter 3 contains this tiny, easily overlooked detail about human nature.
What's the detail?
Well, the very first thing Adam and Eve do after the rebellion is realize their vulnerability, their nakedness, and they attempt to cover their profound shame by frantically sewing fig leaves together.
It is the ultimate original DIY project.
It really is.
They feel this massive, crushing weight of spiritual exposure, and their instinct is to solve an internal, legal, spiritual crisis with some foliage they found on the ground.
It is the birth of what theologians call self-salvation. They believed they could manufacture their own covering, that they could manage their own guilt through their own effort.
And it hasn't stopped, has it?
Not at all. If you look closely at human history, our fundamental psychology hasn't evolved one bit since that moment. We are still frantically sewing fig leaves.
We really are. We build elaborate philosophical systems promising ultimate peace through self-improvement.
We chase extreme wealth, hoping it will build a fortress against our vulnerability.
We curate perfect digital avatars online to cover our deep insecurities. I mean, we engage in performative morality to signal to others that we are quote-unquote good people.
The sources argue that all of these pursuits, when used to justify our own existence, are just modern fig leaves. We are trying to cover our profound sense of inadequacy without submitting back to the authority of the Creator.
But the narrative makes it clear that God rejects the fig leaves. A self-made covering might hide you from another human, but it does absolutely nothing to address the legal reality of that cosmic lease violation.
The guilt remains.
So God intervenes. Genesis 3, verse 21, states that God made garments of animal skins for them and clothed them.
Which introduces a completely devastating reality into the pristine environment of Eden. For God to provide animal skins, an innocent animal had to lose its life. Blood had to be shed.
The covering for human guilt could not be manufactured by human hands.
No, it had to be provided by the Creator at the cost of an innocent life.
And that moment is the inception of a theme that dominates the rest of the Bible. It sets the stage for a massive, multi-millennial rescue operation that traces a direct line to the final courtroom in Revelation.
It introduces the concept of substitutionary atonement.
That's a huge concept in these texts.
Substitutionary atonement is the central nervous system of biblical theology. The sources track this concept as it expands through history. It starts with one animal for one couple in Eden. Then, centuries later, it scales up to the national level during the Exodus in Egypt.
Right. We see the institution of the Passover, the Israelites were enslaved, and a devastating final judgment was falling upon the Egyptian empire.
And God instructed the Israelites to take an unblemished lamb, sacrifice it, and paint its blood on the wooden doorposts of their homes.
And the mechanism of what happens next is so crucial here. When the judgment swept through the land, it didn't spare the Israelites because they were morally superior to the Egyptians.
No, not at all.
It didn't spare them because they had better theology or because they were intrinsically good people. The text is very clear that the judgment passed over the homes exclusively because of the blood on the door.
The blood was the visible proof that a substitute had already faced death in that household.
The judgment had already fallen there. The lamb absorbed it.
And that historical event acts as an enormous, flashing neon sign pointing toward the first century. You move forward to the New Testament, and you find a wild, eccentric prophet named John the Baptist standing waist-deep in the Jordan River.
Right.
He sees a carpenter from Nazareth walking toward him, and he doesn't announce Jesus as a great moral teacher or a political revolutionary. He points at him and declares, "Behold, the Lamb of God, who takes away the sin of the world."
Wow. So the entire sacrificial system of the ancient world, all the blood shed on Jewish altars, was basically a shadow cast backward by this singular person.
Exactly. John is explicitly connecting Jesus to the suffering servant prophesied in Isaiah chapter 53.
Right. Isaiah wrote hundreds of years prior that this figure would be pierced for our transgressions, that he would be crushed for our iniquities, and that the Lord would lay on him the iniquity of us all.
The physical torture of the cross is horrific, but the sources emphasize that the true weight of Calvary wasn't just the Roman nails. It was the psychological and spiritual crushing of bearing the cumulative guilt of humanity.
The cross is fundamentally a legal transaction.
Yes. And this is where we have to dive into a heavy theological word from the texts, propitiation.
Propitiation.
Right? In Romans chapter 3, the Apostle Paul writes that God presented Christ as a propitiation by his blood. In the ancient world, Propitiation meant an offering that turned away wrath by fully satisfying the demands of justice.
Fully satisfying it.
If God is perfectly just, as we established from Psalm 89, he cannot simply sweep human rebellion under the cosmic rug. He can't look at genocide, abuse, exploitation, and daily selfishness and just say, hey, nobody's perfect, don't worry about it.
Right. Because if he did that, he would be corrupt.
Exactly. The penalty for treason against the Creator must be paid. The wrath against sin must be expressed.
But the paradox here is that the judge himself steps off the bench, walks to the executioner's block, and absorbs the penalty in his own body.
Yes, justice doesn't disappear. It falls with absolute fury, but it falls upon the willing substitute.
And because of that transaction, Paul concludes that God can remain perfectly just, having punished the sin, while simultaneously being the one who justifies, who declares innocent, the person who places their faith in Jesus.
The moral integrity of the universe is maintained, and the mercy of God is unleashed.
And the receipt for that transaction, the proof that the check actually cleared, is the resurrection. Romans 4 says, he was raised for our justification.
If the penalty wasn't fully paid, if there was still 1 ounce of guilt left unaccounted for, the grave would have maintained its legal claim over him.
He would have stayed dead.
Right. The empty tomb is the universe's ultimate cleared balance notification.
I love that. Cleared balance notification. Now, understanding that transaction fundamentally alters how we perceive the Great White Throne Judgment.
It does.
The final judgment is not a sudden, arbitrary act of a frustrated deity. It is the necessary, inevitable counterpart to the cross.
If God has provided a comprehensive, agonizingly costly substitute for human rebellion, then those who ultimately reject that substitute must inevitably stand and bear the weight of the law themselves.
But wait, hold on a second. I need to jump in here regarding the logistics of these judgments because the terminology across these manuscripts can get really tangled.
It can be very confusing, yeah.
If someone has accepted that substitute, if their debt is paid and the resurrection is their receipt, do they still have to stand trial at this terrifying Great White Throne?
Oh.
Is a believer's eternal destiny suddenly put back on trial at the end of time? Because that sounds like double jeopardy.
It's a critical point of clarification, and theologians are adamant about separating these events. The New Testament actually describes 2 entirely distinct judgments, separated by purpose, outcome, and participants.
Okay, what are they?
The first is known as the Bema, or the judgment seat of Christ. The second is the Great White Throne.
Let's break down the bema first.
So the word Bema comes from the ancient Greek athletic games. It referred to the raised platform where the judges sat, not to condemn athletes to prison, but to evaluate their performance and award the laurel wreaths to the victors.
Oh, that changes the tone completely.
Right. When the Apostle Paul talks about believers standing before the judgment seat of Christ in 2 Corinthians chapter 5, he's not talking about a penal trial. He is talking about an evaluation of stewardship.
So the question of salvation has already been settled.
Entirely settled. The Bema is an assessment of how a believer lived their life after being saved. It evaluates their faithful service, their hidden motives, and the spiritual durability of their works.
And Paul uses an architectural metaphor in 1 Corinthians, right?
He does. He compares a believer's life works to a building. Some build with gold, silver, and precious stones, things that have eternal value. Others build with wood, hay, and straw, things done for selfish ambition or earthly praise.
And the judgment acts as a fire.
Yes. The wood and hay burn up.
Yeah.
The builder might watch a lifetime of selfish pursuits disintegrate. But, and this is the paramount detail, Paul explicitly says the person themselves will be saved, but only as through fire.
They lose rewards, but they do not lose their soul. It's like a massive corporate audit of a regional manager. The CEO isn't evaluating whether the manager is an employee. That fact is established.
Right, they aren't firing them.
The CEO is evaluating how they managed their specific budget and team over the last decade. If they mismanaged it, they might miss out on a massive bonus. They might face deep regret, but they aren't going to be stripped of their citizenship or thrown into prison.
That captures the dynamic perfectly. The eternal status is secure, but the eternal reward is variable. Now, contrast that with the Great White Throne Judgment found in Revelation 20.
Okay.
This is an entirely different courtroom. It is not an evaluation of believers for rewards. It is the ultimate, final assize for every human soul throughout history who rejected the provision of the substitute.
Their names are not found in the Book of Life.
Right, and therefore they face the unshielded justice of the Creator.
So we arrive at the absolute epicenter of the sources. History is over, the Bema is past, the millennium, which we'll discuss later, has ended. Let's look closely at how the Apostle John, writing in this highly symbolic, apocalyptic style, actually describes this courtroom.
Yes.
Revelation 20, verse 11. Then I saw a great white throne and him who is seated on it.
To read apocalyptic literature properly, you have to understand that John is not just writing a sterile historical record. He is attempting to translate cosmic, multidimensional realities into human language.
So the adjectives he uses are carefully chosen to convey profound theological truth.
Exactly. Let's take the word great. In the first century, John is writing to Christians who were living under the shadow of the Roman Empire. Rome was the ultimate earthly power. The emperor's throne dictated life and death across the known world. By calling this final throne great, John is dwarfing every earthly empire. This throne has no geopolitical borders. There is no higher appellate court. Its jurisdiction is the totality of existence, and its verdicts are absolute and final.
And the throne is white. In our modern context, white is just a clean aesthetic, maybe a minimalist design choice. But in the symbolic language of Revelation, it carries a terrifying weight.
It symbolizes absolute, unapproachable moral purity. Flawless, uncorrupted righteousness. If you think about earthly courtrooms, even the best ones operate in shades of gray.
Definitely.
Judges have personal prejudices. Evidence can be manipulated. Juries can be swayed by charisma rather than fact.
This throne is pure white. It emits a blazing, scrutinizing light that strips away every shadow, every deception, and every rationalization. It represents an environment where a lie literally cannot exist.
And sitting upon this pure, unrivaled throne is the One. As we established, John's Gospel tells us the Father has entrusted all judgment to the Son.
The risen Christ is the judge.
Yes, but it's the reaction of the universe to his presence that is so visceral. The text says, "From his presence, earth and sky fled away, and no place was found for them."
The visual of the sky itself trying to escape the room is staggering. The Apostle Peter expands on this in his second epistle, describing the heavens passing away with a roar and the physical elements melting with fervent heat.
The old creation, the physical universe that was subjected to the curse and corrupted by millennia of sin, bloodshed, and decay, cannot maintain its molecular cohesion in the unveiled presence of absolute holiness.
It unweaves.
It unweaves. The universe doesn't just bow, it completely dissolves.
I find the cosmic reversal happening here to be one of the most haunting concepts in the entire Bible. The sources really draw this out. Think about the historical narrative of Jesus.
Oh, this is profound.
The one whose presence is currently melting the galaxies is the exact same person who, 2,000 years earlier, stood silently in a limestone courtyard in Jerusalem before a deeply compromised Roman governor named Pontius Pilate.
The creator of the cosmos allowed himself to be bound, mocked, and judged by his own rebellious creations.
He submitted to the corrupt verdict of a human courtroom. And now, the script is flipped with terrifying totality. The universe is gone, and the Creator is receiving every human being before his bench.
The roles are permanently reversed. The text continues, "And I saw the dead, great and small, standing before the throne."
The great and the small. Suddenly, every single metric we use to measure human worth on Earth is rendered entirely meaningless.
Completely meaningless.
It's like a courtroom where the building melts, the gallery vanishes, and suddenly the billionaire tech mogul, the ancient pharaoh, the forgotten subsistence farmer, and the marginalized outcast are all standing shoulder to shoulder on a completely level plane.
The VIP passes don't work here.
The bank accounts are vaporized, the political immunity is gone.
All earthly hierarchies evaporate in an instant. The only thing that remains is the naked human soul standing before its maker. And what is vital to remember is the unique nature of the judge presiding over this level playing field.
Because the sources argue that Jesus Christ is the only being perfectly qualified to execute this final judgment.
Exactly. Because he possesses a dual nature. Because he is fully God, he has the omniscience to know every hidden fact and the absolute authority to execute the sentence.
But because he is fully human, his judgment is not cold or detached.
He knows what it feels like to be trapped in a fragile physical body.
Right. The writer of Hebrews states that we do not have a high priest who is unable to sympathize with our weaknesses.
Jesus experienced profound human grief at the tomb of Lazarus. He experienced the trauma of betrayal by a close friend. He experienced physical torture, hunger, thirst, and exhaustion.
He knows the human condition intimately.
Therefore, when he judges, he is factoring in the reality of human frailty. It is perfect justice executed through a lens of perfect experiential empathy.
So we have this scene. The universe has fled. The playing field is level. The ultimate empathetic judge is seated. And then the trial officially begins.
The evidence is brought forward.
Revelation 20, verse 12 says, "And books were opened, then another book was opened, which is the book of life, and the dead were judged by what was written in the books, according to what they had done."
We need to look very carefully at the distinction the text makes here between the plural books and the singular book.
Okay, what's the difference?
The plural books contain the exhaustive, meticulous, unrelenting record of human history. These are the ledgers of every deed, every spoken word, every hidden thought, and every secret motive.
It is the raw data of a human life.
Yes. The singular book of life, however, is completely different. It is the register containing the names of those who belong to Christ, those who have been redeemed by the substitute.
But this introduces a massive theological tension, and I have to push on this because it feels contradictory on the surface.
Go for it.
If the entire message of the New Testament, what Paul writes in Ephesians chapter 2, that salvation is by grace through faith and not a result of works, if that is true, why are people at the end of time explicitly being judged according to what they had done?
Right. Why a forensic audit of actions if grace is the defining factor?
Exactly. Why is the Almighty doing that?
It is a profound tension, but theologians resolve it by distinguishing between the basis of salvation and the evidence of salvation. The sources clarify that works are never meritorious, but they are always evidential.
Break down how those two ideas function differently.
Okay, meritorious means that your actions act as a currency to purchase your salvation. It's the idea that if you put enough good deeds on the cosmic scale, they will outweigh the bad deeds, and God owes you entry into heaven.
Which the biblical texts unilaterally reject.
Unilaterally. The debt of sin is too high, human currency is bankrupt. Evidential, on the other hand, means that your actions are the unavoidable, visible proof of your underlying spiritual reality.
The book of James makes the famous argument that faith without works is dead.
Exactly. If a person has truly received the grace of God, if the Spirit of God actually resides within them, it will inevitably alter their trajectory. It will produce a new orientation toward love, repentance, and obedience.
So a changed life is the pulse that proves the spiritual heart is actually beating.
Precisely. So, at the Great White Throne, the plural books of deeds are open to prove the absolute justice of the verdict.
The exhaustive record will demonstrate beyond a shadow of a doubt that the individual consistently chose autonomy, rebellion, and self-rule over submission to the Creator.
The deeds are the evidence of the rebellion. The Book of Life, however, operates on a totally different principle. It is purely relational.
The book of life is essentially the ultimate question of, do I know you?
Yes.
In Matthew chapter 7, Jesus warns that many will point to their own impressive deeds, and his terrifying response is, "I never knew you." It's entirely about the relationship with the substitute.
That is the dividing line of eternity. But the presence of these plural books raises another fascinating question about the nature of God's omniscience.
Right, because if God knows everything instantly, if he knows the error from the beginning, and he knows the number of hairs on my head, why does he need to open up celestial filing cabinets?
It does sound strange.
It almost paints a picture of God needing a memory aid. Like, he has to flip to page 10,000 to remember what a specific person did on a random Tuesday in 1998.
The physical imagery of books is an accommodation to human understanding, but the theological purpose of opening the records is vital. The sources emphasize that these books are not open to inform the judge.
Who are they for, then?
They are open for the public demonstration of his justice. We see this pattern established all the way back in the opening chapters of Genesis.
When Adam sinned and hid, God walked through the garden asking, "Where are you?"
Right. And when Cain murdered his brother, God asked, "Where is Abel, your brother?" God did not lose an omniscient track of Adam, nor was he unaware of a corpse in the field. He asked those questions judicially. He was forcing the hidden reality out into the light.
He is establishing a public record. He wants the universe to see the truth.
Exactly. In Romans chapter 3, Paul quotes the Old Testament, saying that God will be justified in his words and will prevail when he is judged. The Great White Throne is as much about vindicating the character of God as it is about judging humanity.
By opening the exhaustive books of deeds, God is showing the entire assembled cosmos, every angel, every demon, the redeemed and the condemned, the exact math behind the verdict.
No one will be cast away claiming a mistrial. No one will be able to say, "I was basically a good person, you're misjudging me."
The reality of their deeply rooted rebellion will be undeniably exposed to themselves and to the universe. Every mouth will be stopped.
And the fact that there is an exhaustive record of deeds points to a concept that I found deeply compelling in the source material, the idea of proportional judgment, or degrees of accountability.
We often think of ultimate judgment as a blunt instrument, like a one-size-fits-all pass or fail, but the text suggests a staggering level of nuance.
The justice of God is infinitely granular. In Luke chapter 12, Jesus tells a parable about servants who disobey their master. The servant who knew the master's will and disobeyed receives a severe beating, but the servant who did not know and did what deserved a beating receives a lighter beating.
The foundational principle of divine justice is that to whom much was given, of him much will be required.
Which means God isn't applying a blind standard. He factors in the specific context of every single human life.
The calculus of divine justice is beyond human comprehension, really.
It truly is. God factors in the amount of moral truth a person was exposed to. A religious leader who exploits his congregation will face a far stricter judgment than someone raised in total darkness.
God factors in the trauma someone experienced, the abuse that warped their worldview, the genetic predispositions they battled.
He sees the time someone tried to do good but failed, and he sees the hidden selfish motives behind seemingly charitable acts. True, impartial justice requires complete context, and only an omniscient creator can provide that.
It is terrifying to realize that nothing is missed, but at the same time, there is a strange comfort in knowing that the judge isn't relying on a superficial summary.
He sees the whole picture.
He does. But following this logical progression inevitably brings us to the heaviest, most emotionally devastating section of these theological manuscripts. The sources pause here for a major excursus to deal with the unavoidable implications of this courtroom.
We cannot talk about Revelation 20 without talking about the theology of hell.
We can't. The text explicitly states that if anyone's name was not found written in the book of life, they were thrown into the lake of fire. It describes this as the second death.
This represents eternal conscious separation from the presence, goodness, and grace of God.
I think for modern listeners, and frankly for anyone with a beating heart, this is the most difficult concept in the entire biblical framework to reconcile.
It is. It feels viscerally wrong to many.
It does. The dominant question becomes, how can a deity who defines himself as love enforce an eternal, agonizing separation? How does God's love not override his wrath in the end?
The emotional recoil we feel toward this doctrine is natural, but the sources argue that our discomfort often stems from a shallow definition of love.
How so?
We tend to define love merely as a blanket acceptance, a kind of cosmic tolerance. But profound love is fiercely protective. Let's return to the analogy of a human courtroom.
Okay.
Imagine a judge sitting on the bench. Standing before him is an unrepentant human trafficker, or a dictator who ordered the slaughter of thousands. If the judge smiles warmly, bangs the gavel, and says, "I am a fundamentally loving person, so I forgive you unconditionally, you are free to go," the world would erupt in outrage.
Absolutely. We would not call that judge loving. We would call him morally bankrupt. We would call him complicit.
Right, because ignoring the evil is a profound violation of love for the victims. If the judge loves the innocent, he has to direct his wrath toward the one destroying the innocent.
Wow. So wrath is not the opposite of love. It is the necessary immune system of love.
Exactly. God's wrath is his holy reaction to the cancer of sin that has brutalized, degraded, and destroyed the creation he loves. A God who does not possess wrath against a world of child abuse, genocide, and exploitation is a God who does not truly care about humanity.
True justice is the mechanism that permanently quarantines evil so that goodness can flourish.
The tragedy of the Great White Throne is that those who refuse to let go of their rebellion must ultimately be quarantined along with it.
That reframes the concept of wrath significantly. But what about the other massive question the sources tackle here?
The fate of the unevangelized.
Yes. What about the millions of people throughout history who lived and died without ever hearing the name of Jesus? They never had the opportunity to read the New Testament or accept the substitute. How can a granular proportional justice system condemn someone for failing a test they didn't know they were taking?
The theological answer to this is anchored in the first 2 chapters of Romans. The Apostle Paul argues that while not everyone has received special revelation, meaning the scriptures or the gospel message, every single human being has received general revelation.
Paul states that God's invisible attributes, namely his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly perceived since the creation of the world in the things that have been made.
The universe itself is a testimony to a creator. Furthermore, Paul argues that the requirements of the law are written on human hearts, and their consciences bear witness.
So everyone is given a baseline of light. Everyone inherently knows that there is a moral order, and everyone at some point has knowingly violated their own conscience.
Exactly. The condemnation is not for failing to believe a gospel they never heard. The condemnation is for suppressing the truth they did have and choosing to rebel against the light they were given.
And ultimately, theologians point back to Abraham's rhetorical question in Genesis chapter 18, when he was interceding for the city of Sodom.
Abraham asks, "Shall not the judge of all the earth do what is just?"
The bedrock assurance of the biblical narrative is that when the books are finally closed, no one will have been treated unfairly. The omniscient judge will act with perfect integrity.
Understanding the terrifying certainty of this judgment and the exhaustive nature of the evidence brings up a very practical question about our current reality.
If the evidence against human rebellion is already staggering, and if this final courtroom is an absolute necessity to cleanse the universe of evil, why are we still here?
Right. Why is human history still dragging on? Why doesn't the Creator just drop the gavel today and end the suffering?
The seeming delay of justice is a profound source of human angst, but the Apostle Peter addresses it directly in his second letter.
He does. The early church was facing mockery from people asking, where is the promise of his coming? Everything just keeps going on as it always has.
Peter responds by explaining the unique timescale of God, where 1,000 years is as one day.
But then he reveals the motive behind the timeline. He writes, "The Lord is not slow to fulfill his promise, as some count slowness, but is patient toward you, not wishing that any should perish, but that all should reach repentance."
So the delay is not a sign of divine apathy. It's not a holding pattern, because God is distracted.
The delay is the active, agonizingly patient mercy of God. Every single morning the sun rises, every mundane commute to work, every ordinary Tuesday that passes without the sky rolling up like a scroll is a deliberate, calculated extension of grace.
It is the Creator holding back the floodwaters of ultimate justice to grant humanity one more day, one more breath, one more opportunity to recognize their spiritual poverty and run to the substitute.
The history of the world is entirely sustained by the patience of God.
But the apocalyptic literature makes it clear that the patience has an appointed limit. The door of the ark eventually closes, the gavel eventually falls.
And when we look at the climax of Revelation chapter 20, we see that it isn't merely humanity standing trial.
The scope of this judgment sweeps up the cosmic originators of rebellion and the very fundamental laws of the fallen universe.
This brings us into the final, massive transitions of the biblical narrative. In the first part of Revelation 20, before the Great White Throne, there is a deeply debated period known as the Millennium.
It is a 1,000-year period where Christ reigns directly, and Satan is described as being bound in a bottomless pit, completely unable to deceive the nations.
So for an extended epoch, humanity lives under a perfect divine administration. Perfect justice, perfect peace, no demonic influence.
It is the ultimate utopia.
Yet the text reveals a shocking twist. At the end of the 1,000 years, Satan is briefly released from his prison.
He goes out to deceive the nations once more, and staggering numbers of people rally to his cause to surround the camp of the saints. They attempt one final doomed rebellion.
After experiencing literal heaven on earth, they still choose treason. That is a devastating commentary on human nature.
It really is. The sources argue that the millennium serves a crucial theological purpose here.
Throughout history, humanity has constantly blamed its rebellion on external factors. We say, if we just had better political systems, if we eradicated poverty, if we had better education, if we just removed bad influences, human nature would naturally gravitate toward goodness.
The millennium strips away every single one of those excuses. It provides humanity with a flawless environment, a perfect economy, and perfect leadership. And the moment the opportunity arises, the human heart still chooses autonomy and rebellion.
It proves, beyond any philosophical debate, the words of the prophet Jeremiah. The human heart is desperately sick. The problem isn't the environment. The problem is internal. We don't just need a better society. We need a completely new nature.
And that final failed rebellion leads to the ultimate termination of the architect of evil. The arc of Satan's story throughout the Bible is sweeping.
You trace him from the ancient prophets, describing him as a prideful, beautiful cherub who wanted to ascend above the stars of God.
You see him as the subtle, deceptive serpent in the Garden of Eden, introducing the virus of autonomy to humanity.
You track him through history as the accuser. And finally, in Revelation 20, verse 10, his narrative violently ends. He's thrown into the lake of fire and sulfur. The great deceiver is permanently silenced. The accuser is stripped of his voice forever.
The source of the cosmic infection is destroyed. But the text doesn't stop there. It moves to a conceptual judgment that is almost difficult to wrap your mind around. Revelation 20, verse 14 states, Then death and Hades were thrown into the lake of fire.
That is such a wild, triumphant image. When you think about it, death has been the undefeated, undisputed heavyweight champion of the human experience since Genesis chapter 3.
It has claimed every king, every philosopher, every loved one. It is the great, terrifying unknown. Hades represents the holding place of the dead, the prison itself. And the text says that both the concept of dying and the prison of the dead are picked up and hurled into the incinerator.
It is the execution of the executioner. The Apostle Paul famously taunted death in 1 Corinthians, asking, "O death, where is your victory? O death, where is your sting?"
He identified death as the last enemy to be destroyed. By throwing death and Hades into the lake of fire, God is permanently revoking their authority. The cycle of decay that was introduced in Eden is violently, decisively terminated.
I picture it like a corrupt, tyrannical prosecutor and an abusive prison warden being dragged into their own maximum security facility, locked inside, and then the key is melted down.
Death itself dies. The universe is finally purged.
And that ultimate purge is the necessary prerequisite for the final act. Once the old, corrupted universe has fled, once evil is quarantined, and once death is destroyed, the canvas is blank.
This paves the way for Revelation chapter 21, the emergence of the new heaven and the new earth.
The sources do a brilliant job of contrasting the opening pages of the Bible with these closing pages. It creates this breathtaking, macro-level symmetry.
Genesis starts in a pristine garden, the Garden of Eden. It features the tree of life, a river, and a reality where God walks intimately with humans in the cool of the day. There is no separation.
But then the rebellion happens, the curse falls, and humanity is exiled into the wilderness. You read thousands of pages of history filled with war, famine, prophecy, and longing.
And then, at the very end of Revelation, where do we land? We land in a garden city, the New Jerusalem. The tree of life is back, yielding fruit. A river of the water of life is flowing from the throne. The exile is over.
It forms a perfect, unbroken circle. Yet it is not merely a return to the innocence of Eden. It is a massive elevation. Humanity doesn't just return to an untested garden. They enter a fortified, glorified city as redeemed children.
The text makes a definitive statement. No longer will there be anything accursed. The fundamental brokenness of reality is repaired. And the intimacy of this restoration is described in one of the most tender verses in all of Scripture.
Revelation 21 verse 4 says, "He will wipe away every tear from their eyes, and death shall be no more. Neither shall there be mourning, nor crying, nor pain any more, for the former things have passed away."
Think about the physical intimacy of that imagery. The same omnipotent judge, whose mere presence melted the galaxies just a chapter earlier, is now described as leaning down, like a gentle parent, to personally wipe the tears from the faces of his creation.
It's not just an end to crying. It is the Creator acknowledging the depth of human sorrow and personally comforting the traumatized. The universe transitions from a courtroom to a home.
It is the ultimate vindication of faith and the complete restoration of shalom, the universal flourishing and harmony that God originally intended. But as we process the sheer scale of this cosmic conclusion, the sources issue a very firm warning.
We cannot simply treat this as fascinating apocalyptic trivia. Understanding the reality of the Great White Throne and the new creation is meant to act as a massive gravitational force, pulling on how we live our lives right now, today.
We have to apply it. We can't just marvel at the architecture of the end times. We have to live in light of it.
Exactly. The manuscripts outline several core paradigm shifts that this knowledge should produce in the listener. First and foremost, it demands that we cultivate a relentless, eternal perspective.
Our culture trains us to be incredibly short-sighted. We are obsessed with immediate returns, quarterly profits, social media validation, and accumulating physical comforts.
But when you truly internalize the reality of the Great White Throne, when you realize that the sky will one day flee and all earthly status will reach zero, it radically reweights your values.
It forces you to ask the question Jesus posed. For what does it profit a man to gain the whole world and forfeit his soul? If a pursuit doesn't survive the fire of divine evaluation, its value is fundamentally an illusion.
It shrinks our anxieties about the temporary, and it completely rewires our motivation for pursuing goodness.
The sources highlight that if you have accepted the substitute, if you are relying on the grace of the cross, your pursuit of a moral life shouldn't be driven by a terrified, paralyzing fear of the judge.
The Bronusicete is an evaluation, yes, but the debt of sin is paid. Therefore, we should pursue holiness out of overwhelming, joyful gratitude. We do good works because we are deeply in love with the Savior who stood in our place, not because we are desperately trying to bribe a reluctant judge.
That shift from fear to gratitude changes everything. Furthermore, understanding the certainty and severity of this final courtroom must create an evangelistic urgency.
If the biblical narrative is true, if this cosmic interception of justice is inevitable, then sharing the reality of the cross with others is not an intellectual exercise. It isn't about winning a theological debate or proving your worldview is superior.
It is an act of desperate, profound compassion. It is warning a neighbor that the bridge is out ahead and showing them the only safe detour.
And finally, there is a profound takeaway for anyone listening who is currently enduring deep suffering, marginalization, or the bitter sting of injustice.
If you have been abused by a system or hurt by someone who seemingly got away with it, the doctrine of the Great White Throne is not a threat to you. It is the ultimate, ironclad promise that your pain has been witnessed by the cosmos.
It is the guarantee that no evil act will ever simply evaporate into the ether of history. The scales will be perfectly, decisively balanced, your tears are recorded, and ultimate justice is coming.
For the believer, contemplating the Great White Throne should not produce a spirit of dread. It should produce a spirit of profound, reverent worship. It is the bedrock assurance that the chaotic, painful history of this world is not spiraling out of control.
It has a destination. Evil has a definitive, non-negotiable expiration date. The judge is the savior, and his uncompromising justice is the very thing that paves the way for eternal, unbroken peace.
I want to leave you with one final thought to mull over as we close this deep dive. It's a subtle observation pulled from the very back of these commentary notes, but it acts as a lens that fundamentally refocuses everything we've talked about.
It's a fascinating detail.
Yes. The sources point out that throughout the intensely vivid, often terrifying scenes of judgment in the book of Revelation, heaven never once celebrates the infliction of pain.
When the angels, the elders, and the redeemed multitudes sing and worship around the throne, they are not cheering for the suffering of the condemned. They're not reveling in vindictive revenge.
What they are celebrating is the righteousness of God. They are celebrating the final, glorious restoration of moral order to a broken universe.
Right.
So here is the question for you to wrestle with. If the ultimate, perfect divine justice is not driven by petty, vindictive anger, but is entirely focused on the restoration of moral order and the protection of goodness, how might that change the way you view justice in your own life?
How does that alter the way you handle conflict, the way you extend forgiveness, and the way you seek restitution right here, right now?
We started this journey talking about the profound frustration of human courtrooms, how we are forced to navigate the dark with broken flashlights and fragmented evidence. It leaves us weary. But the promise of the Great White Throne is that the darkness is temporary.
The creator of the cosmos sees the whole board. He knows the hidden depths of every heart. He will restore the balance with perfect precision.
And the most staggering truth of all is that the one who holds the gavel, the one who possesses the right to condemn the universe, has already stepped down from the bench, walked to a cross, and offered to pay your fine with his own life. Think about that.